Hello everyone, and welcome to the Ancient Mythology Stories channel. Today, I will present a brief biography of former US President Barack Obama Part 5. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, you want to see these old stories every day. Let's get started. The 2012 election. At the beginning of September 2012, at its national convention in Charlotte, North Carolina, the Democratic Party officially nominated Obama and Biden as its candidates for president and vice president of the United States on the anniversary of the September 11, 2001 attacks. Obama's attention and that of the world was directed to Benghazi, Libya, where an attack on the U.S. diplomatic post resulted in the deaths of U.S. Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 other Americans. Initially, it was thought that the attack had been a spontaneous outgrowth of rioting occurring outside the post in response to an anti-Islam film that had been produced in the United States. Angry demonstrations against the film had occurred elsewhere, most notably at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. In the following days and weeks, however, it became increasingly certain that the assault had been a premeditated terrorist attack. Obama promised to get to the bottom of the matter, but both he and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton acknowledged their ultimate responsibility. In the situation, the issue persisted as a point of criticism of Obama by Romney and the right in general. Obama maintained a significant lead over Romney in September in the national opinion polls, partly a result of a convention bounce and partly because of negative perceptions some held of his Republican challenger. Those perceptions were deepened by the release of secretly shot footage at a private fundraiser at which Romney said, "There are 47% of the people who will vote for the president no matter what, who believe that they are victims, and whom he would never be able to convince that they should take personal responsibility and care for their lives." In the heated aftermath, Romney stood by his remarks, though he said that they had not been elegantly stated. Both campaigns were spending fortunes in what was projected to be the most expensive presidential campaign in history, the first since the creation of the public financing system, in which neither candidate accepted public funds and the spending limitations that went with them. Romney and the Republican Party, as well as Obama and the Democrats, each raised about $1 billion in donations, totals that did not include the tens of millions spent by super PACs, the political action committees that, as a result of the Supreme Court's 2010 decision in Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission, were allowed to accept unlimited donations from wealthy individuals, corporations, and unions, provided that the PACs operated independently of the candidate's campaign. Obama and Romney both presented themselves as champions of the middle class and those who aspired to join it, while the president offered a vision of American prosperity that spread centrifugally from the middle. His Republican challenger believed that economic well-being was initiated at the top by job creators and flowed down, an approach that Obama claimed had been tried in the past and failed. In highlighting the importance of tackling the deficit, Obama emphasized the need for spending cuts but proposed returning tax levels on the wealthiest Americans to those that were in place during the Bill Clinton administration. Romney advocated maintaining the Bush-era tax cuts, including those for people at the top of the economic pyramid, as well as providing additional cuts, while promising to reduce the deficit with spending cuts and the elimination of tax loopholes. He accused Obama of being unsympathetic to business while citing his own success as an entrepreneur as a prime qualification for the job of setting the economy right as president. Much of Romney's campaign was grounded in a criticism of the handling of the economy by Obama, whom Romney blamed for the slowness of the recovery and the consequent hardships endured by the middle class, especially those who were among the long-term unemployed. Obama was quick to acknowledge the suffering of many Americans, brought about by the Great Recession and the gradualness of recovery. But he was equally quick, according to many Republicans, to point to the bad hand he had been dealt by the Bush administration. Some of the president's supporters believed that he had not been adamant enough in emphasizing how his own policies had helped forestall much greater economic calamity. Romney also promised to revoke the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, which he referred to derisively as Obamacare, a term the president proudly owned as he trumpeted the benefits of the act on the campaign trail, reversing the advantage Republicans traditionally had enjoyed on defense and security issues. Obama repeatedly noted the elimination of Osama bin Laden on his watch. He also highlighted his successful removal of American forces from Iraq and his promise to remove U.S. troops from Afghanistan by 2014. Despite his earlier political missteps, Romney stole Obama's momentum and re-energized his campaign on October 3rd, with a commanding performance in the first presidential debate, in which he showed himself to be the president's equal in terms of stature and presence. To some ears, Obama's plea for patience with his policies sounded apologetic, and his performance was generally agreed to have been lackluster. Biden breathed new life into the Democratic effort by taking the offensive in his debate with the Republican vice presidential nominee, Wisconsin Representative Paul Ryan, a key spokesman for some of the most conservative elements within his party. Obama regained his stride in the second town hall-style debate by engaging more forcefully with Romney, as he would again in the third and final presidential debate, despite those strong performances. However, Obama seemingly had, at best, pulled even with Romney nationally. In the final weeks of the campaign, the candidates primarily focused on a handful of battleground states whose electoral votes, it was believed, would determine the outcome of a razor-close election in the Electoral College. In the last week of October, Sandy, a hurricane-turned superstorm that had ravaged parts of the Caribbean, brought widespread destruction to the East Coast and Mid-Atlantic states. New York City and New Jersey were particularly hard hit, and the image of Obama and New Jersey's Republican Gov. Chris Christie up to that point, one of the president's most vocal critics during devastated areas in his state, and bringing promises of rapid aid, was a remarkable demonstration of bipartisan leadership by both men. On November 6, 2012, Obama won a narrow victory in the national popular vote, but triumphed in almost all the battleground states to win a second term, garnering 332 electoral votes to Romney's 206. Democracy in a nation of 300 million can be noisy and messy and complicated, he said in his election night victory speech, adding that we are not as divided as our politics suggest. We're not as cynical as the pundits believe. We are greater than the sum of our individual ambitions. After the election, Obama and Boehner entered into negotiations to try to avoid the so-called fiscal cliff, which involved either the expiration or enforcement of a series of economic measures set to transpire at the turn of the new year They included the expiration of the Bush-era tax cuts, temporary payroll tax cuts initiated by the Obama administration, and some tax breaks for businesses, along with the automatic application of across-the-board spending cuts to the military and non-military programs required by the Budget Control Act of 2011, which came to be known as sequestration. Although the president and the Speaker of the House were unable to reach a workable compromise, Biden and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell cobbled together a last-minute agreement that passed the Senate 89-8 and House 257-167 with 85 Republican votes in the lower chamber on January 1, 2013. The bill preserved the Bush-era income tax cuts for individuals earning $400, 0 or less annually, and couples earning $450. 0 or less. Obama had campaigned on setting those limits at $200,000 and $250,000, respectively, but raised taxes on those earning more than that from 35% to 39.6%, the first federal tax increase in 2 decades. While it also raised taxes on dividends and inheritance for some, it did not extend the payroll tax cut. Obama signed the bill on January 2nd. The gun control debate and sequestration. At the top of the president's agenda in 2013 was the introduction of gun control legislation, an issue that again had taken center stage in the aftermath of a mass shooting at Sandy Hook School in Newtown, Connecticut on December 14, 2012, which resulted in the deaths of 20 children and 6 adults. The shooter also killed himself and his mother that day. Obama called upon Congress to enact legislation that would institute universal background checks for gun purchases, ban the sales of assault weapons and high-capacity, more than 10-round magazines, provide for greater protection in schools, and place a renewed focus on treating mental illness. He also took the issue to the public, passionately advocating legislation in a series of campaign-style events at the same time that supporters of gun rights, most notably the National Rifle Association and RA, vehemently opposed his proposals. Despite polls that showed overwhelming public support for universal background checks, a bill focusing on a measure that would have greatly expanded background checks failed to receive sufficient support when it was considered by the Senate in April 2013. Conscious of the threat of filibuster, both parties had agreed that a supermajority of 60 votes would be required to move the bill, or any amendments to it, including a ban on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, to a formal vote on passage. Although some Republicans, whose party generally opposed the legislation, voted for the measure, calling for expanded background checks, some Democrats, whose party generally supported the legislation, voted against it, and it failed 5-6, as did all other proposed amendments, prompting withdrawal of the bill. As the NRA and other supporters of gun rights celebrated, Obama said the bill's withdrawal marked a pretty shameful day for Washington. January's budget compromise had delayed automatic cuts on military and social spending for 2 months, but when the new March 1, 2013 deadline passed without Democrats and Republicans reaching an agreement on an alternative approach to deficit reduction, sequestration began. It took a while for most Americans to feel the effects of the across-the-board cuts. However, as spring progressed, air traffic delays ballooned as a result of short staffing caused by forced furloughs of air traffic controllers, Congress quickly allowed the Federal Aviation Administration to shift funds earmarked for facility improvement to salaries. At the same time, Air Force officials bemoaned a lack of preparedness that they felt was a consequence of reductions in flight practice and maintenance necessitated by the sequester, cuts to military spending, and officials from a wide range of government-funded programs and agencies, from the Meals on Wheels program for seniors to the National Park Service, began to warn of looming problems. Spring scandals and summer challenges. In May 2013, the Obama administration found itself much embattled as new controversies rose to take their place, alongside ongoing attempts by some Republicans in particular. Representative Darrell Issa of California, in his role as chairman of the House Oversight Committee, not only to find further fault with the State Department and the administration regarding the 2012 attack on the diplomatic post in Benghazi, but also to allege that there had been a cover-up in the aftermath of the attack. At the center of the renewed efforts to prove that the administration had misled the public were recently revealed emails that indicated State Department and other administration officials had asked that references to the al-Qaeda-linked group Anwar al-Shari'a and prior warnings of danger be stricken from the talking points to be used by UN Ambassador Susan Rice when she appeared on television news programs several days after the attack. Republican critics alleged that these changes showed that the administration had scrubbed Rice's remarks in order not to tarnish Obama's record on security. During the run-up to the presidential election, the Obama administration dismissed the claims of a cover-up as politically motivated and contended that the process of developing the talking points was concerned not with politics, but with differences between individuals in the State Department and Central Intelligence Agency regarding the yet-to-be-understood nature of the attack. The focus of much Republican criticism regarding the attack was Hillary Clinton, who had resigned as Secretary of State in February to be replaced by John Kerry, but who was a potential candidate for the 2016 presidential election. The administration found itself on the defensive when employees of the Internal Revenue Service (IRS) were accused of having used excessive scrutiny to delay approval of tax-exempt status. For some conservative political groups, Obama condemned this misconduct by the IRS as inexcusable, requested and received the resignation of the acting commissioner of the IRS, and promised that the Treasury Department would establish safeguards to ensure that such behavior would not recur. Also troubling for the president were revelations that in spring 2012 the Justice Department had subpoenaed access to the records of some 20 phone lines used by reporters and editors who worked in several offices of the Associated Press without notifying that organization. This action had been taken as part of a widespread investigation into a national security news leak related to a terrorist plot hatched and foiled in Yemen to blow up a U.S.-bound plane. Learning in May 2013 that the Justice Department had subpoenaed access to these phone records without having notified them, representatives of the Associated Press, as well as some legislators from both parties, said that they were deeply disturbed by what they saw as an egregious violation of the freedom of the press. Attorney General Eric Holder, who had earlier recused himself from involvement with the investigation because he had been questioned as part of it, characterized the investigation as involving one of the most serious leaks he had ever encountered. The Obama administration responded in part by calling for renewed pursuit of legislation that would create a federal shield law to provide the same sort of protection that many state laws provided for the confidentiality of journalists' sources and communications. All three scandals became the focus of congressional investigations. June brought a new set of problems for the administration, when it was forced to respond to the revelation that the National Security Agency (NSA) had compelled a telecommunications company to turn over metadata such as numbers dialed and duration of calls for millions of its subscribers. This secret information was leaked to the Guardian newspaper by American intelligence contractor Edward Snowden, who also disclosed the existence of a program that mined data from Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and other internet-related companies for the NSA, the FBI, and a British agency. Snowden, who was charged with espionage, ended up in Russia, where he was granted temporary refugee status, further straining relations between that country and the United States, which were already at loggerheads over developments in the Syrian civil war. Russia's continued support of its ally Syria, as well as that of China, prevented the UN Security Council from responding forcefully to the war. Obama, seemingly seeking to avoid open-ended involvement in another Middle Eastern conflict, had been cautious in his response to the situation in Syria, prompting some critics to label him the avoider-in-chief. As the death count in Syria rose and reports surfaced of the use of chemical weapons by the forces of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, the engagement of the U.S. government increased. Food and financial aid from the U.S. were extended to the Syrian opposition in February 2013, and the beginning of military aid was promised in June. Obama had said in May 2012 that what he called his calculus for U.S. involvement in Syria would change if we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That red line appeared to have been crossed when hundreds of people died, allegedly as a result of Syrian government forces use chemical weapons in suburban Damascus on August 21, 2013. On August 30th, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said that the United States had high certainty that chemical weapons had been used in the incident, and that government forces had carried out the attack. He also reported a death toll more than 1,400 that was considerably higher than earlier estimates. The Syrian government continued to deny its use of chemical weapons and blame the opposition, although the British Parliament had voted against endorsing Prime Minister David Cameron's call for military intervention in principle. Obama indicated that a U.S. military response would be forthcoming, even without British involvement. French President François Hollande, on the other hand, continued to express support for French involvement in a military response. On August 31st, Obama shifted gears and asked for congressional authorization for military action, while awaiting the findings of UN weapons inspectors who had returned from Damascus. After inspecting the site of the attack, released on September 16th, their report indicated that there was clear and convincing evidence that surface rockets had delivered the nerve agent sarin in the attack. The report did not indicate blame for the attack. In the meantime, on September 14th, Russia and the United States brokered a framework agreement under which the Syrian government would accede to the International Chemical Weapons Convention and submit to the controls of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, release a comprehensive listing of its chemical weapons arsenal within a week, destroy all of its chemical mixing and filling equipment by November, and eliminate all of its chemical weapons by mid-2014. While the Obama administration indicated that the framework included an appeal to the UN Security Council to authorize the use of force should Syria not fulfill the terms of the agreement. The Russian government said it had not agreed to that condition. The Obama administration's foreign policy in the region was also being tested by events in Egypt, where the military had removed President Mohamed Morsi from power in July, because the U.S. government was legally prohibited from providing financial aid, which amounted to more than $1 billion annually for Egypt to countries whose leadership changed. As the result of a coup, the administration hesitated to label the change in power a coup. However, Obama was adamant in urging a swift return to civilian rule, and the stakes went up when hundreds of Morsi supporters were killed by government forces in separate incidents in July and August. Obamacare remained a thorn in the side of Republicans, particularly those associated with the Tea Party movement, who led an attempt to include a one-year delay of funding of the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act in a continuing resolution to fund the federal budget that faced an October 1st deadline. The president, for his part, promised to veto the resolution if it contained defunding of Obamacare, after the House Republican majority refused to give up its requirement of a funding delay for Obamacare and the Senate Democratic majority refused to endorse a continuing resolution that included that requirement. The federal government partially shut down for the first time in 17 years, furloughing hundreds of thousands of employees and closing government offices. Obama was adamant that any discussion on the budget would be contingent upon fully reopening the government, and he maintained that stance as the October 17th deadline for extending the national debt ceiling approached, and with it the threat of default. On October 16th, moderate Republicans voted with Democrats in both houses of Congress to pass a bill forged by Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid that ended the partial shutdown by funding government agencies and offices through January 15th, 2014, extended the government's borrowing power through February 7th, and tasked a negotiating committee with coming up with long-term budgetary solutions. By the end of 2013, the House and the Senate had passed the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2013, based on a compromise that replaced the bulk of the automatic spending cuts required by sequestration with targeted cuts and raised discretionary spending divided evenly between military and non-military funding. The resulting budget was intended to last through the 2014 fiscal year.